She walked into her son's mansion wearing an oil-stained uniform, and his wife humiliated her in front of everyone. Low-class freeloaders don't belong here. But the woman they looked down on was hiding a secret worth millions. And when the truth finally came out, everyone in that room realized they had made one terrible mistake. Stay until the end to discover what happened next. If you enjoy stories about betrayal, hidden secrets, shocking twists, and unexpected karma, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications for more stories. My name is Marlo Vera, and for 32 years, I worked with machines. I knew the sound of a failing engine before most people could hear anything wrong. I knew which bolts would loosen, which pumps would overheat, and which old machines could still be saved with the right repair. My hands were usually rough, my boots were rarely clean, and my work uniform almost always carried stains that refused to disappear. I never considered any of that embarrassing. My son, Kalen Vera, saw things differently. Kalen had built a successful career in corporate finance. He lived in a large house overlooking Lake Belmere with his wife, Seraphine Darcy. Their home had polished floors, expensive furniture, and a guest list that seemed to change depending on someone's position. Seraphine cared deeply about appearances. I discovered just how deeply one Saturday evening. That afternoon, I had been repairing an industrial generator at Northbridge Transit Works when Kalen called me. "Mom, can you come over tonight?" "What for?" "We're having dinner. Some important people from my company will be here. I want you to meet them." I looked down at my uniform. It was covered in dark oil stains. "I haven't had time to change." "That's fine," Kalen replied. "Just come." So I drove directly from the depot to his house. When I arrived, I immediately knew I had walked into something bigger than a family dinner. Luxury cars filled the driveway. Men in tailored suits stood near the entrance, while women in expensive dresses talked beside the fountain. Soft music played from inside the house. I parked my old truck at the far end of the driveway. As I walked toward the entrance, I noticed several people looking at me. I ignored them. Then Seraphine appeared. She was wearing a silver dress and holding a glass of champagne. Her expression changed the moment she saw me. She looked at my boots, then my stained uniform, then the old metal lunchbox in my hand. Her smile disappeared. "Kalen," she called sharply. My son turned around. His face changed when he saw me.
"Mom."
"You came. You invited me." "Of course." Before he could say anything else, Seraphine stepped closer. "Did you really come dressed like that?" I looked at my clothes. "I came straight from work." She glanced toward the guests. "This is an important evening." "I understand." Apparently, my answer wasn't enough. She lowered her voice. "You could have at least changed." I smiled politely. I didn't realize the dress code was more important than the invitation. Her eyes narrowed. Kalen shifted uncomfortably. "Let's not do this tonight." But Seraphine wasn't finished. She looked at me again, this time without bothering to hide her disgust. "Some people simply don't know when they don't belong." The conversations around us stopped. I could feel several guests watching. I remained silent. Then she said it. "Low-class freeloaders don't belong here." Nobody moved. Kalen looked at the floor. That hurt more than her words. Not because she had insulted my clothes. Because my own son had heard her insult me and didn't immediately defend me. I looked at Seraphine. Then I smiled. She seemed confused. "What are you smiling about?" I placed my lunchbox on a nearby table. "Nothing." Then I looked directly at Kalen. "Actually, I just remembered something." "What?" I picked up my keys. "That this house may not belong to you for much longer." Seraphine laughed. "Are you threatening us?"
"No."
I turned toward the door. "I'm telling you something you don't know." Kalen followed me outside. "Mom, what did you mean?" I stopped beside my truck. For years, I had kept a secret from my son. A secret about his father's company. A secret about my own identity. And a secret worth millions of dollars. But that wasn't the part that frightened me. 3 weeks earlier, I had received a letter from my attorney. Someone had been moving money through a company I secretly controlled. And the trail led much closer to my family than I ever expected. I looked at Kalen. "You'll understand soon." Then I drove away. Behind me, the mansion disappeared in my rearview mirror. For the first time in years, I knew it was time to stop protecting my secret. Because whoever had been stealing from me had made one serious mistake. They had underestimated the woman wearing the oil-stained uniform. The next morning, I opened my workshop before sunrise. The place was small, but it was mine. The walls were covered with tools, old engine parts, and photographs of machines I had repaired over the years. Nobody looking at that workshop would have guessed that I controlled one of the most valuable industrial companies in the region. That was exactly how I wanted it. At 7:45, someone knocked on the office door. I knew who it was before I opened it. Oren. My attorney stepped inside carrying a black leather case. "You said you were ready," he said. "I am." He placed the case on my desk. For 27 years, I had kept the truth about my family's wealth hidden from Kalen. His father, Tavian Vera, had started a small machinery company before his death. At the time, nobody expected it to become important. But I refused to let his work disappear. While raising Kalen, I continued running the company quietly. I hired capable people, invested carefully, and stayed away from the spotlight. Eventually, that small company became Vera Industrial Holdings. Today, it supplied equipment and maintenance systems to transportation companies, construction firms, and energy facilities across the region. And I still controlled 71% of it. Kalen didn't know. As far as he was concerned, his mother was a mechanic who lived modestly and earned enough to get by. I had never lied to him about being poor. I simply never told him that I wasn't. Oren opened the first folder. "Your current holdings are worth approximately $86 million. I nodded. "That's not why I called you." "I know." He opened another folder. "This is." I studied the documents. Several payments had been made from one of the company's internal accounts. The amounts were large. Far too large. "What are these?" "Payments to private vendors." "Who approved them?" "According to the records, Hollis Rain." I frowned. Hollis had managed the company for years. He wouldn't approve payments like these without documentation. That's why I investigated. Oren pushed another sheet toward me. The payments had been routed through several companies I didn't recognize. One was registered to a property management firm. Another belonged to a consulting company. The third was connected to an account I recognized. Seraphine Darcy. I stared at the page. How much? Almost $400,000 over 18 months. I slowly sat down. "Does Kayla know?" "No." "Then we have a problem." Oren looked at me. "I think the problem is bigger than Seraphine." He pulled out another document. "This house." I recognized the address immediately. Kalen and Seraphine's mansion. The property was purchased through a holding company. Who owns it? That's the interesting part. He pointed to the ownership records. The holding company received financing from Vera Industrial Holdings. I looked at him. "How?" "That's what we're trying to determine." For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then I noticed something. The first suspicious transaction was dated 6 months before Kalen married Seraphine. That changed everything. If Seraphine had been stealing from the company after the wedding, I could understand the motive. But these payments had started before she became my daughter-in-law. Someone had been planning this much earlier. Oren. Yes. Find out who introduced Seraphine to Kalen. He looked surprised. You think their marriage was connected to this? I don't know. I closed the folder. That's why I want the answer. Later that morning, I drove to the headquarters of Vera Industrial Holdings. It had been years since I had entered the building. I deliberately parked behind the building and walked through the employee entrance wearing my old uniform. Nobody recognized me. That suited me perfectly. I reached the accounting department and approached a young woman sitting behind a computer. Excuse me. She looked up. Can I help you? I need access to the archived vendor records. Are you with maintenance? No. She frowned. Then who are you? I leaned closer. Someone who knows money has been disappearing from this company. Her expression changed immediately. She glanced around before standing. Come with me. She led me into a small records room and closed the door. Then she whispered something I wasn't prepared to hear. I've been trying to find you. I stared at her. Why? My name is Nimra Quill. I'm a financial analyst here. She opened a drawer and removed an old photograph. It showed my late husband, Tavian, standing beside a group of employees. I found something in the archives, she said. What? She reached into her bag. I think someone has been stealing from Vera Industrial Holdings for years. Then she placed a small silver storage drive on the table. And I think the people responsible know you're still alive. For the first time that morning, I felt genuinely afraid. Not for myself. For Kaylin. I stared at the silver drive on Nimra's desk. For several seconds, I didn't touch it. How long have you known about this? I asked. For months. And you kept investigating? She nodded. Why? Nimra looked toward the closed door. Because every time I reported an irregular transaction, the report disappeared. She unlocked her computer and opened a folder. There were dozens of suspicious payments. Different vendors, different amounts, but the same pattern. The money left Vera Industrial Holdings and eventually moved into private accounts. Whose accounts? That's where things became strange. She turned the screen toward me. The first names meant nothing. Then I saw one I recognized. Seraphine Darcy. My stomach tightened. You found her account. Several. Does she know? I don't know. That answer bothered me. If Seraphine had stolen the money, why had the transaction started before her marriage to Kaylin? I looked at the records again. Then Nimra opened another file. This is where your son's name appears. I froze. Kaylin. His name was attached to a company called Bellcrest Advisory. I knew he had never owned such a company. That's impossible. I thought so too. She opened the registration documents. The company had been created using Kaylin's identification details. Who registered it? That's the problem. The application was submitted electronically. Can you prove Kaylin didn't do it? I found something. She opened a travel record. On the date the company was registered, Kaylin had been in Singapore for a business conference. He couldn't have signed the documents personally. I leaned back. Someone had stolen his identity. But why? Nimra continued. There's more. She opened a spreadsheet. Money from Bellcrest Advisory had been transferred into another company. That company was connected to a man named Varric Darcy. I recognized the name immediately. Seraphine's father. Varric had once worked as a financial consultant for my company. 12 years earlier, he had disappeared after several accounting irregularities were discovered. I had always suspected he had taken money, but I had never found enough evidence to prove it. Now I had a different question. Where's Varric? Nimra shook her head. Officially, he lives overseas. Officially? He still receives payments from companies registered here. I looked at the screen. The amounts were enormous. Suddenly, the entire situation made more sense. Someone had been using Seraphine. Someone had been using Kaylin. And someone had been using my company. But I still didn't know why. That afternoon, I met Oren at a quiet cafe in Greyhaven. I gave him copies of the documents. He studied them carefully. Your son's identity was used to create a financial trail. For what purpose? To make him look responsible. I stared at him. If everything collapses, Kaylin becomes the obvious suspect. Exactly. I felt anger rising inside me. Whoever was behind this wasn't simply stealing money. They were preparing to sacrifice my son. Find Varric, I said. We will. And don't tell Kaylin yet. Oren looked at me. Are you sure? Yes. If he knows, he may confront Seraphine. And whoever is watching us will know we've discovered the scheme. That evening, I drove to Kaylin's house. I didn't tell him what I had discovered. I wanted to see his reaction first. When he opened the door, he looked exhausted. Mom, can I come in? He stepped aside. Seraphine was upstairs. Kaylin lowered his voice. She says you're trying to destroy our marriage. I haven't done anything. She said you threatened to take our house. I told you the house may not belong to you. Why? I looked directly at him. Because there are things about your finances you don't know. His expression changed. What does that mean? It means you need to be careful. About Seraphine? I didn't answer. He looked hurt. You don't trust my wife. I don't trust what I don't understand. Before he could respond, Seraphine came downstairs.
She stopped when she saw me.
You're here again. I looked at her calmly. Yes. She crossed her arms. If this is about the house, you should speak to a lawyer. I already have one. Her face tightened. Then her phone rang. She looked at the screen and walked outside. I watched her through the window. A minute later, she returned. Her face had gone pale. Who was that? Kaylin asked. Nobody. But I knew she was lying. Because when she put her phone on the table, I saw the name that had appeared on the screen. Varric. Her father was supposed to be overseas. Yet he had just called her. And judging by her expression, he had not called to say hello. He had called because he knew I was getting close. The next morning, Nimra didn't come to work. Her apartment had been broken into during the night. Nothing valuable was taken. Not her television. Not her jewelry. Not even her laptop. Only one thing was missing. The backup drive containing the remaining financial records. That was when I understood the truth. We weren't investigating a dead scheme. We were standing in the middle of an active one. And whoever was behind it had just realized that I was no longer hiding. The morning after Nimra's apartment was broken into, I stopped trusting every door. Not because I was afraid. Because someone had crossed a line. They had searched for evidence, not money. That meant they knew exactly what they were looking for. I arrived at my workshop before 6. Oren was already there. You need to leave town for a few days, he said. No. Marlowe, whoever is behind this knows about Nimra. And now they know she failed to destroy the evidence. He sighed. You could be in danger. I placed my coffee on the workbench. I've been in danger before. This is different. Then we'll handle it differently. At 8, Nimra arrived. She looked tired, but she was carrying a small envelope. I found something before they broke in. She handed it to me. Inside was a photocopy of an old contract. The date was 12 years earlier. The signature belonged to Varric Darcy. But the second signature made my hands go cold. Hollis Rain. My company's former chief executive. I stared at the page. Hollis was working with Varric? Apparently. Why didn't I know? Because the contract was buried in an inactive vendor file. I read it again. The agreement transferred certain company assets into a private investment group. The strange part was that those assets had never officially left Vera Industrial Holdings. They had simply been listed as inactive. That gave me an idea. Can you trace the investment group? Nimra nodded. I already did. She gave me another sheet. The company was called Bellcrest Strategic Partners. I had seen that name before. It was the same company connected to the fraudulent account using Kaylin's identity. I looked at Oren. Find Hollis. We spent the next several hours searching old records. Hollis had retired 5 years earlier. His official address was in a quiet coastal town. But when Oren called, nobody answered. Then Nimra noticed something. There's a recent payment. To Hollis?
No. She pointed to the account.
To someone using his name. I frowned. What does that mean? It means either Hollis is still involved, or someone is pretending to be him. That possibility changed everything. I drove to the old company headquarters that afternoon. The building had changed since the last time I had visited. I entered through the front lobby. A security guard approached. Can I help you? I'm here to see the archives. Do you have an appointment?
No.
He looked at my uniform, then at my old boots. We don't allow unauthorized visitors. I almost smiled. Years ago, I had walked through those doors without anyone questioning me. Now I was being treated like an intruder. I handed him my identification. His expression changed. Mrs. Vera? Yes. He immediately stepped aside. I went upstairs. The archive room was nearly empty. Nimra had told me there was one missing file. The original Bellcrest contract. I found the cabinet. The file was gone. But something else was waiting inside. A handwritten note. 3 words. Stop digging, Marlowe. I stared at it. Then I laughed quietly. Whoever had written it had made another mistake. They had used blue ink. Varric always used black. Hollis always used blue. I photographed the note. Then I called Oren. Find out where Hollis is. We already tried. Try again. This time, we found him. He was living in a small retirement community outside Belmere. I drove there alone. When he opened the door, he looked much older than I remembered. Marlowe. Hollis. He stepped backward. You shouldn't have come. That's what everyone keeps telling me. He looked frightened. Varric is dangerous. Is he working alone? Hollis didn't answer. Did you help him? His eyes filled with shame. At first, I felt my chest tighten. What happened? He promised me money. He said the company would be sold quietly. Nobody would get hurt. And Kaylin. Hollis looked down. Your son was never supposed to be involved. Then why use his identity? I didn't. Who did? He opened his mouth. Before he could answer, a loud crash came from the street. Hollis flinched. Someone had thrown a stone through his window. Attached to it was a folded piece of paper. Hollis picked it up with shaking hands. I opened it. There was only one sentence. You should have left the past buried. Hollis looked at me. They know I'm talking to you. Then tell me everything. He swallowed. Varric wasn't the person who started this. I stared at him. Who was? Hollis looked toward the window. I don't know his real name. What do you know? Only that he approached Varric 12 years ago. What did he want? The company. I waited. Hollis continued. He knew about your ownership. He knew you were hiding your shares. He knew everything. My blood ran cold. How could he know? Hollis looked at me. Because someone inside your family told him. I couldn't speak. My mind immediately went to Kaylin. But then I remembered something. Kaylin had been a child when the original scheme began. There was only one other person who had known everything about my finances. My husband's former personal assistant. A woman named Eloan Vale. I had not heard her name in 20 years. And, according to Hollis, she was still alive. That evening, I returned to my workshop. Oren was waiting. We found something. He placed an old photograph on the table. It showed Eloan standing beside Tavian. Behind them was a young man. I recognized him instantly. It was Varric. But there was something else. Written on the back of the photograph was a date. And beneath it, a name. Kaylin Vera. I stared at the photograph. For the first time, I wondered if my decision to protect my son had actually put him in danger. Then my phone rang. It was Seraphine. Her voice was shaking. Mrs. Vera, I need to tell you something. What? I know who is behind everything. I stood up. Who? She whispered a name. And this time, it wasn't Varric. It was someone I had trusted for almost 30 years. Seraphine was still on the phone when I asked the question. Who is behind everything? For several seconds, I heard nothing but her breathing. Then she said, Eloan Vale. I closed my eyes. The name carried memories I had not touched in decades. Eloan had worked for my family long before Seraphine entered our lives. She had been my husband's personal assistant, my trusted secretary, and eventually one of the few people who knew how our company was structured. After Tavian died, she disappeared without saying goodbye. I had assumed she wanted a quieter life. Apparently, I had been wrong. Where are you? I asked Seraphine. I'm at the Belmere Hotel. Stay there. Why? Because if Eloan is involved, you may be in danger too. I drove to the hotel, with Oren following behind me. When I arrived, Seraphine was waiting in the lobby. For once, there was no expensive dress, no confident expression, and no carefully controlled smile. She looked frightened. You knew about this? I asked. Not everything. Tell me what you know. She lowered her voice. My father introduced me to someone about 2 years before I married Kaylin. Who? Eloan. That surprised me. Why would she contact you? She said she could help my father solve his financial problems. And what did she ask from you? Seraphine hesitated. Access. To what? Kaylin's documents. I stared at her. You gave her his information? I didn't know what she planned to do with it. That isn't an answer. Seraphine looked down. I gave her copies of some documents. I felt anger rising. You helped them. I know, but you didn't know about the identity fraud. No. Why did you keep accepting money? Her eyes filled with tears. Because I was afraid. That answer did not excuse her, but it explained something. Seraphine had not joined the scheme because she wanted my company. She had become trapped because she was trying to protect her father from people who controlled his debts. Then another twist appeared. She reached into her handbag and removed a small envelope. Eloan gave me this. Inside was a photograph. It showed Eloan standing beside Varric. But there was another person in the photograph. I recognized him immediately. Hollis. The three of them were standing outside Vera Industrial Holdings 12 years earlier. On the back was a message. The owner must never know. I looked at Seraphine. What does Eloan want? She wants control of your shares. Why? Because she believes your husband promised them to her. I almost laughed. Tavian never promised Eloan my shares. She believes he did. That was when I understood. Eloan's motive wasn't greed alone. She believed I had stolen something she thought belonged to her. For 12 years, she had been building a plan to take it back. She had recruited Varric. She had manipulated Seraphine. She had used Kaelin's identity. And she had waited for the right moment to force me out. But there was one thing she had not expected. I had kept copies of Tavian's original legal documents. The next morning, Oren and I went to the old family storage facility. Inside a locked metal cabinet, we found the original shareholder agreement. Tavian's handwriting appeared on the final page. I read the document twice. Eloan had never owned a single share. The supposed promise had never existed. But the document contained something else. A clause Tavian had added shortly before his death. If anyone attempted to obtain control through fraud, the shares would automatically transfer into a protected family trust. I looked at Oren. Does Eloan know about this? Apparently not. Then we have our answer. That afternoon, I called a special board meeting. Varric arrived first. Then Hollis. Then Eloan. She walked into the room, wearing a simple black suit. For the first time in 20 years, I saw her face again. She smiled. You finally came back. I never left. You hid behind other people. I protected my family. She laughed. Your husband promised me everything.
No.
I placed the original agreement on the table. He promised you nothing. Her smile disappeared. Varric looked at the document. Hollis lowered his head. Eloan suddenly understood. The entire plan had failed. Not because I had more money. Not because I had better lawyers. Because she had built everything around a promise that never existed. Oren stood. The evidence has already been submitted to investigators. Eloan turned toward me. You think you've won?
No.
I looked at Kaelin, who had just entered the room. I think my son has finally learned the truth. Kaelin stared at Seraphine, then at me. And for the first time, nobody in that room could hide behind lies. I watched Kaelin walk into the boardroom, and for the first time in years, I had nothing left to hide from him. He looked at the documents on the table. Then he looked at me. Mom, what is going on? I took a slow breath. Everything you were told about the money was a lie. Seraphine lowered her eyes. Kaelin turned toward her. Did you know? She nodded. Some of it. His face tightened. How much? Enough to know I should have told you. The room became silent. Eloan remained standing near the end of the table. She didn't look frightened anymore. She looked angry. You think this changes anything? She asked. I faced her. It changes everything. She pointed at the old agreement. Tavian promised me a place in the company.
No.
He told me I would be protected. He may have told you that you mattered to the company. She shook her head. He promised me ownership. I pushed the original document toward her. Then you should have checked the contract. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. She read the final clause again. Her face slowly changed. The clause was clear. Any attempt to obtain control through fraud, coercion, or forged documentation would invalidate the fraudulent transfer and place the disputed shares under the family trust. Eloan had spent 12 years creating a plan that could never legally succeed. She had recruited Varric. Varric had brought in Hollis. Hollis had created false records. Eloan had approached Seraphine. Seraphine had provided Kaelin's documents. And together, they had created a trail designed to make my son look guilty. But they had missed one thing. They had never discovered the trust. Oren stood beside me. The investigators have copies of the financial records, identity documents, communications, and transaction histories. Varric suddenly stood. This is ridiculous. I looked at him. You admitted your involvement. He froze. I continued. And you did it in front of witnesses. His face went pale. The doors opened. 2 investigators entered the room. Varric stepped backward. Eloan looked at me. You planned this.
No.
I shook my head. I prepared for the truth. Varric was taken away first. Hollis followed. Eloan remained still. Before the investigators escorted her out, she looked at me. You could have shared the company with me. I answered honestly. You never wanted to share it. She said nothing. Then she left. Seraphine remained in the room. Kalen didn't look at her. She approached him slowly. I am sorry. He finally looked at her. You gave them my identity. I didn't know they would use it, but you gave it to them. She began to cry. I was trying to protect my father. You protected him by putting me at risk. She had no answer. I didn't interfere. This was something Kalen needed to decide for himself. Several weeks passed. The investigation expanded. The company recovered most of the stolen funds. The fraudulent accounts were frozen. Kalen's name was officially cleared. Seraphine cooperated with investigators and accepted responsibility for the documents she had provided. She lost the house and most of her assets because the money used to support that lifestyle had been connected to the fraudulent scheme. I did not celebrate her downfall. I simply watched the truth take its course. 1 year later, things looked completely different. Vera Industrial Holdings was stronger than before. I created the Tavian Vera Technical Foundation using part of my personal fortune. The foundation paid for training programs for young mechanics, electricians, welders, and machine technicians. Nimra became its financial director. Kalen joined the board. He also moved out of the mansion. He rented a modest house closer to my workshop. One Saturday morning, he came to see me. I was repairing an old hydraulic pump. He watched me for a while. You still wear that uniform? I looked down. It was the same type of uniform Seraphine had mocked. Of course. He smiled. Do you know what I remember most about that night? What? You smiled. I laughed. I was angry. You didn't look angry. I knew something they didn't. Kalen pulled up a chair. Was it because you knew you were wealthy? I shook my head.
No.
Then why? I put down my wrench. Because I knew who I was. He became quiet. I continued. Money can disappear. Houses can be sold. Companies can change owners. But the way you treat people tells me everything I need to know about you. Kalen nodded. I understand now. Good. He looked around the workshop. Mom, I want to help with the foundation. You already are.
No. I mean, I want to work here sometimes.
I smiled. You hate getting your hands dirty. He laughed. Maybe I need to learn. So I handed him a pair of old work gloves. He put them on. Neither of us mentioned Seraphine again. The following month, we opened the first Vera Technical Center. More than 100 students enrolled. On opening day, I stood near the entrance wearing my old oil-stained uniform. Kalen stood beside me. A young student looked at my clothes and asked, Are you one of the mechanics? I smiled. Yes. He had no idea who I was. And I liked it that way. Because I wasn't standing there to show anyone how much money I had. I was there because I had spent my life working. That was enough. Looking back, I realized the insult at Seraphine's house had given me something unexpected. It forced me to stop hiding. It forced my son to question the people around him. It exposed a fraud that had been growing for years. And it reminded me that dignity has nothing to do with expensive clothes. Seraphine thought my oil-stained uniform made me look poor. Eloan thought my silence made me weak. Varric thought my son could be used as a scapegoat. They were all wrong. I didn't defeat them by humiliating them. I defeated them by letting the truth speak. And that became the greatest lesson I could give Kalen. Never measure a person's worth by what they wear. Never assume quiet means powerless. And never mistake kindness for weakness. Because sometimes the person standing in the corner in an old uniform already knows the truth everyone else is trying to hide. If you enjoyed my story, and you believe people should be judged by their character rather than their appearance, don't forget to subscribe.